I grew up in this beautiful county, Marin County, and boy, what we have here today is just so, brings me back home to my childhood. I had so many wonderful experiences here. This was such an idyllic place to grow up in the 60s. I never did a single professional, I have never done a single professional thing in Marin County. So today is a first for me. I hope to do something professional, so hopefully this goes well. I want to make a couple of points to you today. The 4 points that I want to give you are that there's good news. The good news is that really there's a solid majority of Americans who are already convinced that we have a problem. They want to see our leaders start to affect solutions. There's a bit of a bad news to my good news spin, and the bad news is they're not very deeply engaged in the issue. So while they're convinced, earlier this morning we heard about the difference between head, heart, and gut. There's a fair amount of head level convinced, not so much heart and gut level convinced. This is where it's in the heart and the gut, or as I'll actually say later, it's in the new brain and the old brain. The difference between those two is convincing versus engaging. The second point that I want to make is really an important point. I'm going to try to say it at least 3 times today so that in hopes that you will remember it. Simple, clear messages, repeated often by a variety of trusted sources. That is the message that is the formula of successful public engagement campaigns. At least it is the formula of successful public engagement campaigns in the world of health, healthcare, public health, the world that I worked in exclusively for 25 years before realizing that the climate change is in fact the mother of all public health issues going forward. There's nothing about climate change that leads me to believe that this is not also the effective formula for public engagement on climate change. So I proselytize this formula whenever and wherever I can. The third and final point that I will make is I'm going to show you 2 different paths to public engagement. I can't tell you everything I know about other paths. There are many alternative paths to public engagement. There's 2 that I have a particular sense of optimism and belief in, and a lot of data to support. And since I am supposed to be the data guy, I like to stick to the data rather than just stick to my opinion. So I'll take you through 2 of those today. But before I do, let's talk about a fundamental paradox of human communication. The less you say, the more you are heard. It's hard to live up. It's hard to actually work with that, because when we feel we have a lot to say, we want to say it all. And whatever time, whatever opportunity we have to make our points, deliver our information, we try to maximize it by bludgeoning people with all that we know. I spend a lot of my time with climate scientists. I consider them one of my most important stakeholder groups. And I have to tell my climate science colleagues that your greatest asset isn't what you know. It's the trust that the public places in you. It's their trust that you know that you have important information, and they want to know what you make of it. They don't really want to know all that information. And your tendency, my tendency, probably most of your tendencies, except for actually we've seen some fabulous storytellers this morning. Storytellers know that overly long stories, overly engaged stories are not necessarily better stories. People do like the embellishments, they do like the details, but generally speaking, the less we say, the more we are heard. But it places a special obligation on us. If we can only say so much, if we are wise to limit what we say, we have to make sure what we choose to share are the most important pieces of information, the most important facts, the most important emotions, feelings, opinions. And there are ways in which people like me, I'm a climate scientist by training, we spend a lot of our time trying to drill down and figure out what information, what points of view are most important in helping people who face important decisions do so in a more informed manner. So audience research is a wonderful thing. It can lead us to identifying the pieces of information that are most important to share. Once we identify that information, we want to say it simply, clearly. We want to repeat. The research is really clear on this point. Message repetition is the single most important attribute of effective communication. But it takes people need to hear it a whole bunch of times before it really sinks in. They might understand it the first time. If it's a simple, clear message, they likely will understand it the first time. But nevertheless, it's repetition that gets them to really think about it, really incorporate it into their own thoughts. And very importantly, sort of towards the end of my slide here, that's when they begin to share it with other people. So we want to get we want to identify the information that's most useful. We want to distill it to its essential self, as short and simple as we can make it. We want to find other trusted voices beyond our own to share it with the people, the organizations that they have access to. And ultimately, we're encouraging members of our target audience to share it with each other. Because while the experts in climate change, the American people trust climate scientists more than anybody else. We survey about this topic all the time. It's good that climate scientists are our most trusted source, but the average American can't even name a single living scientist, much less a single living or dead climate scientist. So climate scientists don't have a whole lot of communication opportunities, but I do. I can speak to my neighbors in the morning when they're out walking and I'm out running, and I can speak to my students and my colleagues and my family, as can all of you. And so real communication effectiveness comes when the simple, clear messages go beyond experts, go beyond the direct communication from experts and get infused into what we talk about amongst ourselves, amongst our friends, our families, our coworkers, etc. We heard that very clearly this morning, that not talking about climate change is the single biggest mistake that can be made, because we can't possibly make the hard decisions, the hard collective decisions, unless we're talking about the problem and we're talking about different options that we have that we can choose to exercise to address those problems. So all of that is simply why I formulated as simple, clear messages repeated often by a variety of trusted sources. Here come the numbers. There are not many numbers on this slide, but this is all incredibly data-based. There are, for those of us who are trying to help move American society forward and global society forward to grapple with climate change, and that makes every one of us in this room, I think we will be in reasonable agreement that there's something that we're all trying to achieve. And those some things are over there on the right-hand side of the slide. So we want people to have concluded that this is a real problem. Then this is a problem worthy of solution. It's not like a minor problem that we can just defer. We want people to understand this is a substantial problem worthy of our attention and worthy of our solution. We want people to support policy solutions, because this is not a problem we're going to ever change our way out of on a mass behavior change basis. Unless we get the policies right, we will never solve this problem. I am not saying, and please don't misconstrue what I say, that we want to convince Americans of the merits of one policy or another, because that part will actually start to break apart in this room, because we don't all agree on what the best policies are. But I think we probably do all agree that we need prudent policies, we need sound policies if we're going to solve this problem. And then the bottom of those sort of those three outcomes, if you will, of public engagement is we need people to start changing what they do in meaningful, important ways, not in meaningless, non-substantial ways. And I'm going to come back to this theme in a moment. But when I say meaningful, important, at very least, I mean I want people to use their resources in the marketplace, the way they spend money. I want them to reinforce vendors, commercial entities, who are trying to line up behind solutions. And I'd frankly like to see them use their resources to withhold their resources from companies who are trying to forestall real meaningful action. And that is a way that's actually a very deeply ingrained way in which Americans respond to the world. Whether we see ourselves or not, we are consumers. And certainly one of the talks this morning made the case that's a relatively recent thing, but it certainly is deeply ingrained in our psyche now. The second way in which I think we can all agree we'd like to see Americans change their behavior is the way in which they act as citizens. Not just as consumers, but as citizens, meaning supposedly we live in the greatest democracy ever. Yet I'm going to show you some data that indicates that our countrymen and women don't necessarily, even large numbers of them who care a lot about climate change, aren't acting in their capacity as citizens in terms of telling their elected officials what kinds of solutions they would like to see them pursue, or even that they would like to see them start vetting solutions and pursuing them. So if we can all agree on those are good outcomes of public engagement, then we move leftward on my slide. Our research has shown that originally we called them the big four key beliefs. Climate change is real, it's human caused, it's bad for people, not just bad for plants, penguins, and polar bears. Because some people care deeply about plants, penguins, and polar bears. All people care about people. And that it's solvable. If this is not seen as a solvable problem, people tend to crawl back into their hole, pull their covers over their eyes, and decide to spend today some other way other than addressing climate change. So we've called those the big four for a number of years now. More recently, we identified a fifth key belief. It's even more important than the other four because we found that it actually is causally prior to the other four key beliefs. People who understand that based on the evidence, more than 97% of climate scientists are now convinced that human-caused climate change is happening. People who understand that are more likely to believe climate change is real, human-caused, bad, and solvable. There's no such thing as a magic bullet in the communication business, but this is about as magic as I've come across. So we've expanded the big four to the big five. These are the 5 key beliefs that predict which Americans support a societal response, support a wide variety of different climate change policies, and who are personally changing their behavior as consumers and as citizens to align with solutions. So those were key beliefs. Now are simple, clear messages. Here are the big 5 described in 10 words. It's real, it's us, it's bad, scientists agree, and there's hope, okay? These are simple, clear messages. I am willing to defend with my evidence that the degree to which we can successfully use our trusted voices to convey these 5 ideas, these key messages, we will be helping to further engage Americans, both broaden and deepen Americans' engagement in the issue of climate change. So this essentially, in 10 words, is our portfolio of 5 communication objectives. Now we really do get to some numbers, and for this I apologize, but I hope I've made the numbers palatable enough that they go down well after dessert. These numbers come mostly from our Climate Change in the American Mind polling project. We've been doing twice annual national polls since 2008. Our objectives are to study what are in the hearts and the minds of the American people with regard to climate change. What do they know? What do they feel? What do they what are the emotions? What are they doing, and what kinds of policies do they support that we pursue collectively? So here, I'm going to show you the 5 key beliefs, the data from the 5 key beliefs. This one is it's real. Okay, so the blue line are back from 2008 until this spring. That's the proportion of Americans who believe that climate change is real. You'll see that even though there was a little bit of a dip between our first 2 surveys, and I'll talk about that in a moment, it's been more or less sort of stable at about 7 out of 10 Americans between 6 and 7 out of 10 Americans since we started this polling in 2008. Conversely, again, with that little dip on our second data point, or blip in this case, about 10 to 20% of Americans aren't yet convinced, or are convinced that climate change is not occurring. So just that most top level belief, you can see that it's, let's just say, 7 to 2. So in any given, if you pull out a random group of Americans, you're going to have 7 who are convinced, 2 who don't believe that climate is changing, and 1 who hasn't yet made up his or her mind. That little weird blip, the one blip and the dip, what happened between the fall of 2008 and January of 2010? The Great Recession, yes, the economy, mortgages going underwater, people losing their jobs. A lot of anger in America, ironically the initial wave of anger over Obamacare, U.S. House of Representatives passing climate change legislation, let's see, oh, here it's all on my slide. And the rise, you know, while the climate change denialism has been going on for a long time, when the prospect of legislation passing the Congress actually, you know, looked like it could happen, the denial machine went wild and they really ramped up the volume. And by the way, the denial machine is really good at simple, clear messages repeated often by a variety of trusted voices. The voices that they feature are not necessarily trusted to you and me, but they are trusted to the people, trusted by the people that they are trying to speak with. And I just love the global warming is baloney sign. I think that's a perfect, simple, clear message. And for those of you who don't live on the East Coast, which is just about everybody in the room but me, in the winter of 2010, we had 2 feet of snow in a single snowstorm. And if that isn't proof that global warming is baloney, I don't know what is. So here comes the second key belief. It's real. Climate change is human caused. We're not doing quite as well there. We've got essentially half of the public who understands that climate change is human caused. And so the difference between the 7 out of 10 and the 5 out of 10, those other 2 who don't believe it's human caused, they believe it's part of the larger cycle of things, larger cycle of life on the planet. And that too is the product of a simple, clear message that has been repeated often by a variety of trusted voices. That is a key talking point of organized voices in America who do not want to see us move forward with solutions. In terms of it's bad, so we're moving on to the third, it's real, it's human caused, it's bad. Well, it would certainly be bad. We would all be convinced it was bad if we thought that Americans and people around the world were currently being harmed by climate change. I sit on a federal panel called the National Climate Assessment. I'm part of a special employee of the U.S. government on the days when I do that. I'm special because they don't pay me. I'm special in my mother's eyes too. But we're currently working on the final, the third assessment, the National Climate Assessment, the third assessment, and it will be released next spring. But the last assessment that was released in 2009, the key takeaway point was climate change is happening here now in every region of America, and it's bad, it's harming us in a variety of different ways. So most Americans don't yet understand that Americans and people around the world are already being harmed by climate change. So what I said earlier about it being bad for plants, penguins, and polar bears, yeah, so people do believe plants, penguins, and polar bears fall into that bar second to the right. Plants and animal species. Lots of Americans believe it's already bad or will be very bad for plants, penguins, and polar bears and for future generations. But if you move this way on my slide, you see that as we move from distant things that some of us care about but many of us don't, to present things that all of us care about, like us, and our family and people in our community, you see this dramatic drop-off in the degree to which people are convinced that these more proximal entities will be harmed. This is a bit of a hard one to show on a slide, but let me talk you through it. So the black line on the very bottom of my slide, we asked people the following question: which of the following statements comes closest to your view? The bottom option is that humans can reduce global warming and we're going to do so successfully. Almost nobody. Started out in 2008 at 5%. It has essentially trended downward since. This is a problem. This is a problem because psychologists, communication scientists, we call this low collective efficacy. When we don't believe that we as a collective, we as a society, have the wherewithal to solve our problems, we as individuals tend not to participate in the process of moving society forward to solve our problems. I actually presented this data to some very, very senior government officials last week. I probably can say who they are, but I don't know. Since the cameras are running, I'm not going to. And the response I got back was, well, you'd have to be a little bit delusional to say anything other than that top response at the top of the slide. Humans could reduce global warming, but it's unclear at this point whether we will do what's necessary. And that's true. I agree with their assessment, but the problem with their assessment is it still means we have low collective efficacy as Americans in our ability to successfully deal with this problem. Which also means, I've had students do entire dissertations on this topic, it means that people who share in that low view of collective efficacy will not engage in society's efforts. So I'm asking you to think deeply today and beyond about what our options are to take this black line at the bottom and essentially switch places with the blue line at the top. I want half of America to develop a robust sense of efficacy that, yes, we can. This is a problem that we can and we will deal with successfully. So that was the first of the big four. Here's the fifth key belief. Less than half of Americans understand that understand the statement that I made before. And when we ask them about it, we ask them in a much more dilute form. We essentially say, which is closest to your view? Most scientists think global warming is happening, or there's a lot of disagreement among scientists about global warming, or I don't know. Large numbers say I don't know. Only 40%, give or take, say most scientists are convinced. We ask the same question in another way, and we give people numeric options. 80 to 100% are convinced, 60 to 80%, 40 to 60, et cetera. On our most recent survey, about 13% pick 80 to 100. Turns out, I said earlier that this is a key belief, because people who don't understand the truth, that there is a widespread consensus among the experts, they are less likely to believe it's real, it's human-caused, it's bad, and it's solvable. So of all the communication objectives out there in America today, of all the public engagement objectives, this is number one on my hit list. This is the one that I feel, I am convinced, based on our data, is most important that we make a difference on this one. Because if we can move this one, we also move the other four key beliefs, and they sort of come to us in one swift, lovely package. Not swift, that's wrong. One lovely package. So, and here's some data, I'll prove it. I spent my summer vacation this year doing a series of 5 different message test experiments. I was and I am working with AAAS, the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, the world's largest general science society. Not that there's a single brand, not that most Americans have any, know of any climate science, any science society at all, but if there is one that I hope they know, I'm hoping they've heard of AAAS. And we tested some messages about some variations on how to communicate the scientific consensus. And we signed off as AAAS. And this wasn't make-believe. They are a partner of mine in this research. So, and this is a message that they're very interested in conveying successfully to the American people. And while this is the top half of this slide is one of the variants of the ads that we tested, we tested the messages embedded in newspaper articles, and we tested them in the form of print ads. And so the upper half of the slide, minus that little pull-out box, that was one of our actual ads that we tested. We tested them online, so people said, yeah, I'll answer your questions. We showed them this message, and then we asked them a bunch of follow-up questions. But what I want you to notice from the message is the simple, clear message that's embedded in this somewhat larger, longer text. And that is, it's the very same language that I used in my opening. Based on the evidence, more than 97% of the experts are now convinced that human-caused climate change is occurring. So in that simple, clear message, I am priming, for any of you who've ever heard that term, I'm priming for scientific reasoning based on the evidence. I want members of my audience to remember that that is how scientists come to conclusions. It's not necessarily how you and I come to conclusions. We tend to be down here. But when scientists are acting in the capacity as scientists, they come to the conclusions based on analysis, based on evidence. And so we prime scientific reasoning, and then we lay the social normative data on them. More than 97% of the experts are now convinced that human-caused climate change is occurring. And I don't know that you can really see it all that well, but one exposure to that message has this really, really powerful impact, more powerful than any I've ever been personally involved with in the past. It changes their perception of the scientific consensus. So on this particular slide, at the bottom is 50%, at the top is 85%. The green line are political conservatives, the red line are political moderates, and the blue line are, that can't be right. It is right. We used bad coloring. The obvious coloring would be for red to be conservatives. My error. At any rate, what I hope you can see from that is that all three groups, conservatives, moderates, and liberals, our simple, clear message increased their assessment, essentially changed the way they answer my question as to what percent of the climate experts, climate scientists are convinced. And they could give me any answer from 0 to 100. It was a full scale. They had any option they wanted. We had this dramatic impact on all of them. And here's the really magical part of it. We brought them together. So they started with very different perceptions about the scientific agreement, the scientific consensus. And after showing them this simple, clear message, 5 minutes later, when I got around to asking them the question again, they were now all giving us essentially the same answer. Wow, I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty cool. But then a moment ago, I said that these ideas sort of come as a package. The perceived scientific consensus is causally related to the other big four. It's real, it's human caused, it's bad, and it's solvable. So this is how they change their answers, or this is essentially the impact of that message on their belief that the United States should exert effort, should expend effort to try to address this problem. We saw essentially the same thing. We moved everybody, we changed everybody's opinion towards the direction of respond, and we brought conservatives and liberals closer together. Really, really an important finding. Liberals and conservatives have different points of views about climate change in 2013 for reasons related to simple, clear messages repeated often by a variety of trusted sources. It was a decision by Voices in America to change conservatives' minds about climate change. And I could show you the data. This precedes when I've started collecting data, but Gallup organization, for example, has been collecting data since the mid-90s. And you can see that around the time that we ratified or tried to ratify the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, liberals and conservatives had the same views about climate change. And over the ensuing 15 years, they moved apart from one another. And it was based on what the voices that they trust were telling them about climate change. We've studied a lot in terms of public support for action. There is much more support for climate action out there in America than you would ever be led to believe by the, thank you, Sarah, by the news media, the news coverage on this issue. And there are even policies that not nearly all Americans agree to, whether or not they're liberal or conservative. All Americans are completely bullish on the idea of transforming our fuel economy away from fossil fuels and towards renewables. Conservatives aren't so keen on the away from fossil fuel part, but they're still very keen on the towards renewables, and Democrats and moderates are very, very keen on both parts of that equation. But now let me just really briefly sort of substantiate what I said earlier. Lots of Americans are changing their actions, but in ways that just aren't all that helpful to us. So this is changing the light bulbs in your home from incandescent to compact fluorescent. The top two lines are essentially in aggregate the proportion of people proportion of American homes who say that they're doing it. It's either largely, they've largely changed out their light bulbs or partially. The group in the bottom say that no, not so much. So you can see Americans are really kind of into that message. We asked them in our most recent survey about a variety of behaviors that we haven't asked about before. Locavorism is the one on the top. Whether or not people bought food grown and produced locally. Locavorism isn't just a Bay Area thing. It's even in my neighborhood, and apparently it's all around America. People are beginning to get the idea that consuming locally produced food is a good idea. Conversely, I'll just skip all the way to the bottom of the slide. We've got only 1 out of 10 people who say that they have essentially bought cleaner energy. I don't know actually how many Americans have the option from their utility provider to buy wholly green energy or partially green produced energy, but only 1 out of 10 are telling us that they're doing it. Earlier, I said that one important way that Americans can use their voice is as consumers, and you can see from this data that about 3 out of 10 are, in fact, do tell us that they are trying to reward companies that are doing the right thing and punish companies that are not doing the right thing by their choice of whom they spend money with. But this is the one that really I lose sleep over. Only 1 out of 10 Americans have, in the past 12 months, tell us, so this is of course an overestimate, people, unfortunately, they tell us the socially desirable answer, so keeping that in mind, only about 1 out of 10 tell us in the past 12 months they've contacted any elected representative to express their views about climate change. So the most potent single action that a given American can take, their action as a citizen, only 1 out of 10 tell me they're doing it. I need to take my story in a slight tangent. America is a diverse place. Duh. And when we started this polling, we wanted to move the climate community, the community of experts and organizations who are working on climate change, we wanted to move them past this idea that America there's 2 Americas out there, those who believe and those who don't believe. Climate scientists, of course, hate the word belief when you talk about climate change, because it's real, your belief is irrelevant. But of course, for me and you, for real people, our belief is everything, and what's real is very much secondary. So what we did is we took the results of our first survey and we did what's called an audience segmentation analysis. We found there are 6 distinct groups of Americans. We call them Global Warming 6 Americas. They range from the woman over my right shoulder here. We call her Alice, Alarmed Alice. She is, as am I, as are most of you probably, she's very concerned about the issues. She's changing her behavior. She supports an aggressive muscular policy response. And then the woman just to her right, we call her concerned Claudia. Claudia also believes that climate change is real. She believes it's human caused. She believes it's bad. She's not really changing her behavior. She's supportive of a policy response, but less than Alice. We go to Carl, cautious Carl in the middle. Carl also believes it's real, not so sure it's human caused or not so supportive of a muscular policy response, but supportive of some sort of response. We move to disengaged Diane, who is currently only 6% of the population. Somebody earlier this morning said every American has heard of the issue. Almost. 6% of Americans who are working twice as hard to pay the rent. They make less money, they have less education, and they tell me in response, when I actually meet them face to face, they say, yeah, I've heard of it, I don't know anything about it, I haven't had time to learn about it. It's just not something I've had time to deal with. But in the 6 years in which I've been doing this polling, that group has in fact shrunk from, I believe it started at 11 or 12%, and now it's down to 6%. So whomever made the point earlier this morning that every American has heard about the issue is almost completely right on that. Then we have doubtful David. David tends not to think it's real, and if it is real, he tends not to believe it's human caused, and he's not terribly supportive of a policy response, but he's still listening. And then my friend at the very end, dismissive Dan. He is the angry white male that we all know and we've all heard about. And he is the Tea Party. And he feels he is every bit as engaged in this issue as is Alice. But he's reached the total opposite conclusion as has Alice. So there are 2 segments of Americans who are deeply engaged in this issue. They are polar opposites. They are more or less equal in size. And everybody else, the other 4 Americas in the middle, they are to a greater or lesser degree less than optimally engaged in this issue, like much less than optimally engaged. So I would contend that if your objective is to activate the engaged, Alice is your gal. If your objective is to broaden and deepen engagement in the issue among the American people, it's these 4 Americas who you are trying to speak to. In more research, I won't show you any numbers, but I'll simply make the point that we know that people who feel that they have personally experienced climate change are more likely to believe it's real, it's human caused, it's bad, and it's solvable. So there's something about saying in response to a survey question that you've personally experienced climate change that seems to be really useful. We conducted some research about 2 years ago which showed that Alice will tell us she's personally experienced it, but she's so totally committed to her worldview that you could throw more extreme weather events at her, or you could show her the melting glaciers in Glacier National Park and it wouldn't change, it wouldn't influence her. She's already maxed out. And you're not going to influence Dan on the other end because he's totally committed to his worldview. But these 4 Americas in the middle, when you can actually show them how they have personally experienced climate change, it moves them in the direction towards Alice. So showing people how they have personally experienced climate change turns out to be a really important educational and public engagement strategy. How many people read this book when it was a New York Times bestseller last year? Not so many. Everybody in this room has to read this book. Certainly, if you were my students, you'd be forced to read this book. But as my advice to you, this is one of the most important books you can read, and it's a pure joy. Danny Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics. He is a Berkeley and Princeton psychologist. He remade the field. His psychological studies have recreated the field of economics because of his insights into how we respond to information, how we respond to risk information. And what he and his many colleagues have shown is that we actually have two different parallel interacting brain systems. One of our brain systems, the new brain, is analytical. It's the thing that we are trained to use in school, in college, in graduate school. The bigger part of our brain that I love to say my dog and I share in common, that's the old brain. It's the part of the brain that learns through experience. The new brain requires enormous effort that we're usually not willing to give. The old brain learns effortlessly through experience. It's learning 24/7, 365. Anytime we're awake, it is learning. And yet we try to teach people about climate change through the new brain, the analytical learning system. That's more often than not going to be successful because people don't want to devote the hard mental work of thinking to understand what we're trying to share with them. But if we can show them how, for example, the weather is getting worse in their community. And that's because of climate change. That's one of the things that climate change is doing to us. It's making our weather worse. If we can successfully do that, we can teach through system 1, the old brain, the instantaneous, effortless portion of our learning system. And Americans, in the past 2 years really, are starting to connect the dots. They're starting to notice that the weather is getting worse in America and in their community. And the question is, the opportunity is, this is an incredible learning opportunity. Is anybody curating or narrating the experience for them? They may or may not make the connection between worsening weather in their community that they are personally experiencing and climate change, unless somebody tells them, somebody that they trust. And that creates a real opportunity. Lots of Americans have experienced extreme weather in the past year, or feel they have. About a third of the public feels they have been personally harmed by extreme weather in the past year. 1 out of 3 Americans feels they have been personally harmed. We adopt a very broad definition of harm, physical, financial, emotional, but nevertheless, those are all forms of harm, and that means there's 1 out of 3 Americans out there who not only feel they've personally experienced it, but they've been personally harmed by it in the last year. Huge, huge opportunity.
Right now around the area, it's nice outside. It's been a dry day. It still is. Winds out of the west at 7 miles per hour. We've got sunshine. We're going to talk about climate a little bit. There was a milestone that was reached this past week as carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere reached 400 parts per million. In the past, we always thought, well, climate doesn't change very much. Certainly within the experience of most humans, it hasn't changed that much. But now we're seeing some pretty significant changes over a 30-year period. And people have this curiosity. Why are things happening the way they are today?
They can feel what's going on. It's right outside. Now we can help them understand it. That's what we're supposed to do, inform our community.
Climate, that's like pretty much the world around us, and I would love to know more about the climate.
Any chance to get more education out to the public is always a good idea. I think you have to be sure that whatever connections you make, you've got the data and the research to back it up.
You can almost rest assured that just about anything you get from NOAA is going to be good quality. Climate Central has been working with us to help us produce the graphics.
Now, Climate Central has looked at the entire country, and where winters are warming the fastest is in the coldest states in the lower 48.
We provided this Climate Matters segment as part of our weathercast. They're already used to us for weather information on the air. Now we hope that they're going to look toward us for climate information on the air.
As our climate is changing, so are our pollen seasons. That's what we're talking about tonight in Climate Matters.
Jim Gandy said, this is what our plan is. This is how we want to approach it. These are scientific studies. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to share it with the audience. And we're going to tell it in a way that's appealing.
You can talk about climate change on a global scale, but it's really nice when you can bring that down to the local level. For instance, increase in carbon dioxide affects pollen production. There are a lot of people around here with allergies. Poison ivy, there are a lot of people around here who are affected by poison ivy.
The increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is worrisome because of the side effects. It causes some plants to produce more pollen. It also significantly increases the toxicity of poison ivy.
If we can tell that story and help people understand it's about climate change, they can grasp that, they can feel that. We want people to know the things that are happening in their backyard.
When we take a look at South Carolina as a whole, this is what the winters have looked like over the last 100 years. In fact,
When I started this, you could probably count on your hand the number of broadcast meteorologists who were doing anything with climate change. You had the heat wave last year, floods in other parts of the country. You've had some tremendous storms. You've had cold outbreaks. You've seen a lot of turmoil in the weather, which is translated from climate change. And now you're beginning to see more broadcast meteorologists talking about climate change.
the last time levels were this high, well, that's several million years ago. The Earth was 5 to 8 degrees warmer than it is today. That means the planet will warm further. There will be a significant rise in sea level, which will last for at least several centuries, and oceans will become more acidic. The rise is primarily from the burning of fossil fuels, which is changing our climate, and that's why it matters.
Four years ago, I asked for a brave volunteer among the 1,300 weathercasters in the country, somebody who would work with us, NOAA and my team at Mason and Climate Central, to test this idea. Jim Gandy, that gentleman you just met, and Mary Beth Jacoby, his news director, they live and they work in Columbia, South Carolina. They are brave. And they've embraced this concept, as you can see. They've made it theirs. They're teaching their constituents. They're taking the extreme weather events and they're using them as teaching opportunities. And the thing that has shocked us all is that they have received a total of one whining call from a viewer who said, I'm going to stop watching your blankly blank station because you're doing politics. And they've received lots and lots of positive reinforcement from their very conservative viewers in Columbia, South Carolina. My good colleague and friend is from South Carolina, and I'm from Marin, as I told you, and he likes to joke that he's from the most conservative congressional district in America, and I was raised in the most liberal conservative congressional district in America. Yet even in one of those conservative districts, the public appreciates this education. Every national park, every fish and wildlife, estuary environment, all of the places that you physically work create the kind of opportunity that Jim Gandy and his peers as TV weathercasters are using to show people how they have personally experienced climate change. I'm not going to go through any more slides. I have only one or two more. I just want to sort of end up on a really high note. So this brave team of journalists has been rewarded. This year, 2013, Jim won the highest award that his professional association bestows for science communication. He's been featured on NPR Morning Edition, Columbia Journalism Review, Broadcast and Cable, which is this very influential TV magazine, GQ, Rolling Stone. He just winning professional praise and public praise left and right for the work that he is doing. And we're now trying to scale this up to essentially make this nationwide, because we've done research that showed that in the first year of this program, Jim's viewers, the CBS affiliate viewers, learned more about climate change than did viewers of the competing stations in Columbia, South Carolina. This year, probably the greatest praise of all is the lead market in that station, in that media market, and the NBC station. They've developed their own branded educational segments on climate change. Imitation, a wonderful form of flattery. So this is one way in which my team has worked to scale up public engagement. You all have at your disposal an entirely different but entirely complementary set of opportunities for showing Americans how they are personally experiencing this issue, and in doing so, hopefully engaging them through each of the big 5 beliefs that I previously introduced you to. So thank you. I had hoped to leave lots of time for Q&A. I think I left almost no time for Q&A, but maybe we have time for just one or two questions.
Good afternoon, Gillian Bowser from Colorado State University. You didn't talk so much about the other aspect of your 6 Americas, and I wonder if you could actually talk a little bit about the racial differences in beliefs of climate change. I think that's something important to think about with the parks. We don't have a diverse park visitor base. I mean, across the Park Service as a whole, that's been a constant problem. And yet, as that demographic changes, we are not then reaching that audience that is a growing demographic in the U.S., but it also has a very different view about climate change. I wonder if you could share some of the 6 Americas data on climate change, on the different racial minorities and how they view it.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I could go on all day, I won't. But just very briefly, let me make the point that there's very little demographic difference between the 6 Americas. The disengaged segment that I introduced you to and said they're only 6%, that's the one group that really is demographically different. And they're demographically different mainly because of their household income. They're poorer than the rest of America. So they haven't had time. The modal, I tried to represent them, their pictures with the modal person in each category. The one place where I had to fudge it a little was Diane, because actually the modal person in the disengaged segment, at least when we started this research in 2008, was not African American. She is female, but she's white. But the one thing is true is she has less education and less household income. So the differences between the 6 Americas, not so much driven by demographics. Dan, the dismissive, they skew men, they skew more well-educated, and way more conservative. The real differentiator across all 6 is where they fall on the political continuum, from liberals, Marin County liberals, to South Carolina conservatives. So one more question.
Taylor Emerson from the San Francisco Recreation and Parks Department. As a communicator, I was intrigued. I think I saw some of your slides interchanging global warming and climate change as a semantics phrase. I know I've tried to stop saying global warming because it doesn't always feel warmer. Can you speak to that kind of, if you've pulled those different phrases?
I'm almost embarrassed to admit how much research I have done to answer that question. The question is, which is the better term? If we're trying to broaden and deepen public engagement in climate change, which is the better term? When we started this in 2008, we assumed global warming was the more commonly understood term. And we started to see research which led us to believe maybe yes, maybe no. We then started to conduct research, and the answer is kind of complicated. But in essence, the term global warming is profoundly off-putting to Dan. And it makes his blood boil. And it doesn't actually, there's no public dividend in making Dan's blood boil. In our public engagement efforts, the more we can just get Dan to sit down and shut up, the better off we are. The term climate change is actually the term we have moved towards now. Conversely, the cost of using only climate change and not global warming is Alice, the term global warming, those are fighting words for her, but in a very different way. Those are the words that get her out of her seat and charging the hill. And so there's a bit of a trade-off, but since my interest is broadening and deepening public engagement in America on this issue, I now recommend climate change as the superior of those two terms. So thank you all. Not any of you at least showed me openly that you were sleeping. I greatly appreciate that.